Laura, you are a career fulfillment coach, and if I understand correctly, you help people create the careers that they love, and you do that through helping them kind of redefine or define what success looks like on their own terms. And I think some of that has been fueled by your own experience, where you had to let go of some of the maybe ideas of what you thought success should look like, and then you embraced things that truly make you kind of bring you joy and bring you fulfillment. So I think I'd love to start there, and I'd love to just hear your story.
Thank you. So I burnt out at work way back in 2010, and I was in a job that I really loved. I enjoyed the work that I was doing, but I was stressed at work. We'd been through 2 rounds of redundancies, and I wasn't made redundant, but I was impacted by that experience. I had colleagues that left, the work got harder. My home life was awful, which I won't go into, but I also experienced a bereavement. My grandmother died, and all of that culminated in me burning out. And it felt awful. And I made some initial changes at the time. I moved jobs. I was working in the commercial retail world, and I moved into the charity sector, and that really helped with like my work-life balance. But I realised that I didn't want work to have a negative impact on me. So from that point on, I decided that any decision I made at work, whether that was saying yes to a project or when I checked my emails, it was going to make me feel good. And further on down my career, I pivoted into coaching, and that's when I really decided that I wanted to help other people to have fulfilling careers. We spend so much of our time at work that if you don't feel good, that's a really big chunk of your day to not feel great. And also we tend to take that back home with us. So if you've had a really bad day at work or you're stressed, you can't show up as the best version of yourself for your friends and family. And so if people are happier at work, that puts a little bit more positivity in the world, and I think it can all be a better place.
How did you find those transitions? Were there maybe times where your resilience was really tested? Were either of those transitions easier? So for example, if you compare transitioning from retail to charity, was that easier compared to like transitioning into coaching? Or maybe they were all quite tricky.
So the first pivot was done out of necessity. I was feeling so awful at work, and I thought that all of my challenges were down to my job and I needed to change. So I moved from the commercial sector to the charity sector. I thought at the very least, if I'm going to be working a stressful job, I would rather do it for a good cause than to be making money for other people. That for me felt like a really positive change. So that shift was really out of necessity, and it was about looking at the skills I had and where I could take those in perhaps a less stressful environment. My second pivot was much more considered because I knew I wanted to make a change at that point, and it actually took me a lot longer. So around about 2014, 2015, I got this great new manager who actually was really supportive of me. She had a much more of a coaching approach, and she really helped me to realise that I had ambitions for my career and that I wanted more. The challenge was I didn't know what I wanted at that point. So I spent maybe a year and a half just trying out different things to kind of think about what I might want next from my career. I'd recognised that I didn't want to progress with charity retail any further. The options to get more money in that job just didn't really strike me as something I wanted to do. But I couldn't think of any other transferable skills I had to move into a different sector. I'd contemplated perhaps going back into the commercial world, but that wasn't really sparking much joy for me either. So I just went and tried lots of things, did one-day courses or went to different workshops and events. And I went to a workshop at the School of Life, and it was all about having a portfolio career.
Interesting.
And I hadn't heard of this term before, but the woman running the course was a photographer. She also did some workshops, and I think she had a third string to her bow as well. And it was a light bulb moment for me, the idea that you didn't have to have one job Monday to Friday 9 to 5, that you could maybe have 2 or 3 different ways that you earned money, and it could be a bit more flexible. That was the starting point for me, and I realised that I wanted to have some of that variety in my career. And not long after that, I discovered that coaching was a thing. I hadn't come across coaching in careers before. And I had the opportunity to do a 2-day course in coaching to help out with a program in my organisation. And I absolutely loved it and was quite good at it. And so I decided that that would be where I would pivot my career to. The challenge was, at the time, I couldn't immediately go and do a coaching qualification and start working in that space and be on the same salary that I was on. So there was a barrier there.
Right. Yeah.
So I gradually built up my coaching experience and got a qualification. And so that pivot was maybe about 3 or 4 years in the making. And when I was made redundant in 2018, that was the perfect moment for me to start my business, because I was redundant, I had some money behind me, I was forced to make a change, and it was actually really positive for me. So where my first career move probably came out of going through a redundancy but not being made redundant, but then really needing to make a shift, and it'd be quite a negative one. The second time that happened, it was the most positive experience for me, and allowed me to go on this journey to do something different.
So what are the careers that you currently have under your belt in your kind of career portfolio?
Yeah, so I continue to do some charity retail. That gives me, I do 3 days a week with a smaller charity, and that gives me a really stable income. And that was really important for me when I was starting to build my coaching business. I didn't want to fully rely on my own business for my sole income. I live by myself, I pay all my bills, and so I didn't want to put myself back in a stressful situation, having to make my business work from the get-go. So I do 3 days a week for a small charity, and I thought that would maybe be a 6-month thing, but I actually really love it there, and that brings me a lot of joy. I then run my career coaching business, where I help people to create careers they love, and I work with a whole variety of different people. I have private individuals who come to me because their organisation hasn't supported them very well and they want to leave and get a different job, or I work with companies to support their staff and retain them. And what's interesting about that actually is the individuals who come to me by themselves often get a new job. The individuals that come through their organisation stay, and they're happier, and they often get promotions and contribute more to the organisation. So I think that really says something about career coaching. But while all of this was going on, friends of mine started a company that brings amateur singers from all over the world to sing in historic London venues. They do a 2-day residency, they bring in a composer, and they asked me to get involved, and it was perfect timing, because at the point where I was moving to this portfolio career and had the time and the flexibility to do something different was exactly when they were doing it. So I've been working with them since 2019 to put on these events. I do it ad hoc. I come in for a concert residency and help it run. And for me, that's pure joy, you know, being able to use my skills in a different way and be in the world of singing, which is what I do as a hobby, just brings me a lot of joy. So for me, that portfolio career is flexibility. It's variety, but also when I burnt out at work, I developed a chronic health condition, which leaves me with a lot of fatigue and brain fog, and so being able to have more control over my week, not having to work 9 to 5 is really helpful. So on a Thursday, if I'm feeling a bit tired, I'll have a bit of a lie-in, and then I'll see a coaching client later in the morning, and that just gives me so much more flexibility.
What would you say are maybe more challenging things, maybe what you find challenging around having kind of different things to focus on?
I think the biggest challenge is time management, because you have to do your job within the confines of the time that you've agreed to. So I treated them like they were 3 separate jobs. I had goals for each of them, and I managed my time really effectively so that I didn't let one take over the other. And I think that's the key to a portfolio career. You've got to remember that you have responsibilities to multiple places, but when you're working for separate people, or you're working for yourself and somebody else,
you can't come and tell them, that person is more important than you.
Exactly. But however many different roles you have in your portfolio, they are all equally as important. So you have to be really good at time management, which means thinking ahead, spotting where there might be challenges, working out where things might take longer than you think they would. I think it's also important to be able to kind of compartmentalise and leave behind different things, because again, if you're working for say 2 different organisations, you don't want to be thinking about what's going on at one organisation where you're actually meant to be giving your time to another. So being able to kind of switch off at the end of the day, put work to one side and then move to another one is really important.
How do you do your time management? This is getting like into very technical things, but I think this is really interesting because that's something I struggle with. So I don't have kind of different careers to manage or different jobs to manage. I'm in the same job, but when it comes to having multiple projects, that sometimes can be a challenge where you have competing priorities, but also the ability to switch from one thing to another. And I often find myself getting into doing a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, and it kind of works, but then sometimes it doesn't. Then I struggle to stick to like particular days, and sometimes for me it's not so much the physical workload, it's the cognitive workload. How do you manage that? Do you have like particular days where you're like, Monday I'm working on this client and they know that that's the day I'm available, and I'm not available on Tuesday? How do you do it? Or do you do like slots within the day?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that I have really firm boundaries with work because I burnt out. So I really understood I couldn't absorb more work. I couldn't just keep working later and do more because it would make me ill. And I'm really careful with my health now. I struggle with fatigue, so I need to rest. So for me, there is that backstop of I have to get all my work done within this set time frame. There's no like, oh, I'll just do an extra late night here and there to compensate for that. So that's the starting point, is there's no get out. It has to work. I think the second thing is I've got some specific days, so particularly for the charity, I'm an employee with them, so I have a contract. I work with them Monday to Wednesday, so that's the 3 days I work for them. Okay, so that's a non-negotiable.
That's non-negotiable.
Yeah, I don't do any work other work while I'm working for them because I'm contracted to work for them for that time period. Where it gets a bit more fluid is where I'm maybe doing my coaching work, or perhaps I'm doing some work for the concert series at the same time, and allowing that to flex. But again, I just try and allow myself to have the time that I need to do it. So with my coaching clients, for example, I might do an hour session, but I know that I need time before and after the session to prepare for it and to maybe think about any actions that come out as a result of a session. So when a client's booked in with me, I block out time either side so that I can do that. I think when it comes to like the cognitive stuff, it's having that set time where I'm going to work on it, but then it's also having an outlet for the other things. So I come up with some great ideas for like a LinkedIn post while I'm working for my charity job. So I'll jot it down in my phone. I'll just write myself a little reminder, and that kind of allows me to take it out of my head and park it, and then I know I can come back to it.
But you're not wasting your energy on it.
Yeah, and I'm not disrupting my other time. So it's really about thinking, what is my focus for now, and trying to do that as much as possible, and then if other things come up, finding a way to park them. But I think ultimately what it comes down to is being intentional with how you want to spend your time. Like your expectations for success, and maybe if you're working for an organisation, their expectations for success, and marrying the two are really important, because a lot of people who are really successful in work, and by success is a very loaded word, but people who have done well, whatever that means, are often very self-critical, and that's one of the reasons that they do well, is because they have perfectionist tendencies. They want things to be the best that they can be, but it's aligning that with what does your organisation's version of good enough look like, and trying to make sure that you're working within the bounds of what you've been given. So an example would be, if you've got more work than you have time to do it, there's two things going on. Either you're not very good at your job, or there is more work than you can physically get done. So what do you do in that situation? We've got two choices. You can either not do the work and have a conversation with somebody about what's the priority, what would they like you to do, or you can absorb that difference and say, well, actually I'm going to work later so that I can get everything done to the highest possible standard. We don't often have the opportunity to reflect on what we're doing. In those instances, people go, I need to be the best I can be, so I've got to work longer hours. Go. Yeah, rather than taking a step back to go, maybe what's been asked of me is unreasonable.
How do you know when it's no longer about you not being able to manage time? How do you actually come to that realization that actually it's not me, it is the workload? I've tried really hard. I've taken the feedback, I've taken it on board. I've tried to kind of self-reflect and see, is there something wrong with me? But how do you get to that point where you realize, hang on, it's not about me. I am managing time well, but this is just way too much for a single person to manage.
I think the first thing I would do is to see if there's other people in a similar situation to you. So do you have peers who are doing the same types of work, and finding out how they're managing it. And if there is a person who is seen as the person who does it really well, finding out what they're doing. Because there might be things going on, like maybe you're giving too much detail to something, or wanting to do it. Again, it's that thing of a lot of organisations will cope with good enough rather than really well done, and it's trying to work out
what's the balance,
where's the space that you're working in. So the first thing I would say is there anything that you're doing that is different to what is kind of the expectation for the organisation? Your manager isn't necessarily going to help you with that, because they just want the work done ultimately. Yeah. So I think that's the starting point, is to see, are there peers or somebody else who's doing something similar, where you could kind of really reflect on, is there anything I'm doing that's taking me longer? And if there is, why is that? Is it because I just work slightly slower, or I work differently? Or am I trying to do too much more than what's required? Because often that can be a barrier for people, is that they're trying to do too good a job. And sometimes it's hard to describe, getting through work so that you're kind of, I've done this first bit, is that good enough to go? I've done this next bit, is that good enough to go?
It's bit of that agile working,
Yeah, and
just like test and release.
Exactly, rather than trying to get everything completely finished before you move on. So I think there would be some internal reflection there. But if you're really sure that you've got more work on than can be done, I think then it's a different tact. It's not going to your manager to say, oh, can you help me? Because there's too much, because that's putting the problem back on you. I think it's actively going to them saying, there is more projects than I have capacity for. I'm considering dropping this one. Here's the strategic reason. Can it go here? And almost solving the problem for them.
Yeah, you come with a solution.
Yeah. The other question to ask yourself is, do you want to work in this kind of environment? Because different organisations have different levels what they will tolerate in terms of people working late. I have one friend who works in a very similar environment to me, and we finish work on time, give or take. Sometimes we'll work slightly later, but by slightly later we mean maybe half an hour or so. And we have another friend who's often working till 11 o'clock at night or 1 in the morning. And that's the culture of the organisation she's in, and she has signed up to that. Now, whether that's right or wrong is a whole different conversation, but it's the environment that you're in. And so if you find yourself in an environment that is really not suited to how you want to work, and you're not being listened to by your senior leadership team, I would consider whether or not you want to stay there. And it's really hard to change, but I think for your own well-being, there's only so much you can do within a system. And if you're not aligned with that way of working and it's not suited to you, then the best thing you can probably do for yourself is to try and find an environment that's better suited for you.
Are there people where you would say, after having a conversation with them, this is not going to work for you because you have, I don't know, you don't have what it takes, or maybe you have needs that this is not going to fulfill, or something else? Yeah.
Well, as a coach, I don't tell people what's right or wrong, and I kind of don't have an opinion on what they should or shouldn't do. But if someone said I wanted to move to a portfolio career, I suppose in our coaching sessions we would explore what that looked like and what they would need to do, and hopefully through that reflection they would identify whether or not that is something that would suit them. From a practical point of view, if you want a portfolio career, you've got to be able to manage your time. Like I said, that's really important, and be organised, because you're going to be working with different people. You've got to be okay about uncertainty and not quite having everything the same, because your weeks are going to be different. You're working in one job, even if it's different across the course of the year, there's usually quite a lot of cyclical nature to the work that's coming in. Whereas if you're working with 2 or 3 different places, then that variety is going to be there. So if you like things to be the same, then having a lot of variety might be quite challenging for you. But I think whether or not you are suited to a portfolio career is actually part of the bigger question of what is the right career for you. And ultimately, I think people find career fulfilment when they are doing a job that they love, that they're good at, and that they are in an environment that really suits them. Down to things like, if you enjoy working with people, and that's where you get your energy from, a job that requires you to be on your own a lot of the time is never going to work for you. Even if it is doing something that you absolutely love, if you require those other conditions to be met, that's never going to make you happy. And so the advice or the questions I would be asking someone going into a portfolio career are kind of the same as I would be asking someone going into any career. Is this what you're suited to? Have you looked into what actually it's going to entail? Does that work for you, and is that what's going to bring you joy?
If someone is planning on doing multiple careers at the same time, is there some sort of work that you do with them to help them pick the right ones? Because I suppose there's one thing to really, really want to do, let's say 3 things, but could there be a situation where those 3 things are just not compatible?
When I'm talking to people about career fulfilment, I take a very holistic look at it. So one of the exercises I do with people is to get them to create an ideal job description. So like, if you could create your working day, start to finish, what would it look like? And I get them to write it out like a proper job description, thinking about like the person spec, the responsibilities, all of that kind of thing. And what I find when I'm working with people, not necessarily who want a portfolio career, but just generally in their careers, they can usually hit 60-70% of what they're looking for in their ideal job. Maybe in the job they're in, or a job that they're thinking of going for, but there is that chunk of stuff that they're not going to get necessarily from one job. And so the question is, well, where do you get that in your life? So if there's something important to you that makes you feel good, because why do we go to work in the first place? I think the majority of people go to work because they need to pay the bills.
They need to pay the bills.
That's a real driving factor. If we could wave a magic wand and said nobody needed to go to work because you're all getting paid money, I think we'd make very different choices. So there is an element of needing to get paid for what you do, But second to that, there is so much that people get from work that is not about the money. It's about the impact that they have on the world. There is so much that you get from work that is not about the money. So what is going to bring people joy? When they think about all of the things, they might not find it all at work, and that's okay. You can find it outside of work as well. So I worked with one client who was really unhappy in their job, and after a lot of coaching with me, they identified that they were going to do something outside. They were going to join the school PTA. And what was really fascinating was they suddenly enjoyed their job so much more. Nothing changed in their job other than their mindset and their approach to it. But doing this role with the PTA was allowing them to get something that they couldn't get from their job. So rather than trying to move jobs and find everything that they wanted, they found it elsewhere. I think it's about being creative and going, what is it that I want in my life? What is it that I want to do, and how can I get that? And how can I get it and be paid enough money to live my life? And how can I get it so that I feel good? And sometimes the things that bring you the most joy might not be connected with work, but you might have put enough boundaries in place at work that you can finish on time to then go and do the things outside of work that bring you the joy. And if you've got a portfolio career where things aren't compatible for one reason or another, maybe it's saying, well, maybe one of these things is not work, it's not something I'm paid for, it's just something I can do for fun. And that then opens up a possibility of having that in your life and having it something to do, but taking the pressure off it, making it work.
So bringing it back to kind of career change, are there any skills that you started building when you were back in retail, and then you brought them into charity work, and then you brought them into your business?
I think everything you do is useful. So when I just think at some point every experience you've had will be beneficial in some way. And I think people can get really het up about transferable skills and whether they've got them or not and how do they do it. But every job I've had, if I look back, the dots connect much more easily than if I was looking forward and thinking how things might go.
We understand life backwards, don't we?
Yeah. So when I was at university, I did some temp work for a shipping company in Felixstowe, up near where my parents live. And I was in the accounts department. And I discovered I loved Excel and I was really good at it. And I got an insight into how the world of shipping works. When I got my job at the Conran shop as a merchandiser, I was using Excel, but I also had to work really closely with the accounts team. So having an understanding of invoices and invoicing, even just as a temp, just the small experience that I got, helped me to work much better with that team. The Conran shop also imported products, so knowing how the shipping industry worked and who to speak to in that space was also really helpful. Now, I didn't get that job in order to have that experience for that thing in my career later on. It was just really helpful. I think so much of what we do is not specific to the role that we're in. The majority of work is actually about dealing with other people. There are very few jobs where you don't have to deal with any person at any point in your job. And so I think there are so many skills that we develop through all of the different work that we do that is about working with people. Also things like problem solving. All of these kind of skills can transfer so much into other roles. So I can't think of anything specifically where I'm like, oh, that skill was really, really important and I've gone on to develop it. Everything I've done kind of cross-pollinates with everything else and can be useful in a different way. And I think the secret to unlocking that is to not get so caught up in what you're doing. So if I'm working with someone and they're struggling to understand their transferable skills, I'll say to them, describe what you do using the most basic language. Think about describing what your job is to a child in primary school.
I work in consulting and no one really knows what management consulting is, nor do I. Because all I do is put together a PowerPoint slide. That's all I do all day, pretty much. And message people on Teams and write emails. If you don't like PowerPoint, don't go into consulting.
But whatever you're putting into those PowerPoints, if you were to describe what that is and the work that goes into that, that's
boxes, a lot of boxes. That's actually how I did it when I had to think about my transferable skills. Because I suppose I had a different issue. I used to minimize my responsibilities to the degree that they seemed nothing. I was kind of on the other side of the spectrum. I used to minimize my work to nothingness. All I did was this, which is actually not true. So I took almost the vice versa approach when I went through every single task, no matter how small or unimportant it seemed at the time. I went through every task and I wrote out, I did this, I talked to this person, why did I talk to them? I talked to them because of this, I did this, why did I do that? How did I do that? What tools did I use to do that? And I had to almost help myself build it out to actually see that, wow, I'm actually doing a lot. And I had no idea because I used to tell myself, all I do is this.
Yeah.
And I think I mostly struggled with things that are, I suppose they're not as usual. They're not repetitive across many different jobs. But for example, rehearsing. That's all I would do all day. What is it to rehearse? And I started almost like philosophically unpacking, what is it to rehearse? What do I do in that rehearsal? I walk around, I sing, I do this, but like, what does that mean? What skills does one need? How can you tell apart a person who rehearses well and a person who doesn't rehearse well? What about when they rehearse alone versus when they rehearse with other people?
And I think it's really important to be able to identify those things, because if you're trying to change careers, you've got to tell other people that you've got skills to offer. But I think also it's your like toolbox of things that you can use. And being able to see something you've done in one scenario and utilize it in another situation is a really valuable skill to have. I created a project called Unconventional Mentors. So this is where I would take advice from people that I didn't know. These are famous people or people who have excelled in different fields, people who have been dead for 200 years. So I started sharing quotes from these people from all sorts of different walks of life to see what inspiration I could take for my career. And the idea was that I could actively take the advice from them rather than feel like it was being given to me or bestowed on me. And so I would look at artists, writers, scientists, people who've gone to the moon, to see what they said about their careers or what they said about life. And that would then allow me to think about my situation in a different way. Because I'm like, okay, well, if that's how a painter approaches something, how could I do that in my career? I'm not a painter, but how could I bring some creativity, or how could I look at things through a different lens? I also found that it was really stifling if you looked for advice from people who were in the same sector as you. Either because there wasn't anyone to aspire to, particularly if you work, say, in a very male-dominated sector and there aren't any, really strong female leads for you to kind of look to, or you just didn't like the people that were doing the things and you thought, I don't really want to be like them. We're all unique, we all approach things in different ways, and an extrovert giving advice about how to network is not going to work. It's completely wrong.
Who was your favourite advice giver from the 200 years ago?
There is a fantastic quote from Marie Colvin, and I don't know if I'm going to remember it now. So she was a journalist.
We'll look it up.
She was a war correspondent. Bravery is not being afraid of being afraid, I think is the quote.
Okay.
And basically her whole life was about reporting on war zones, on different awful situations to highlight the inequalities that were going on and the atrocities that were going on. She felt it was so important to report on them. She was killed in Syria. She was targeted, actually. She was in a building reporting there, and Assad deliberately bombed the building she was in, and she was killed. There's fantastic documentaries about her. But for me, my life is not a war zone. I am living a lovely life, and the stresses and the challenges and the fears I have in my career are not life-threatening. They might feel like that to me. I'm going to have rejection and disappointment, and I might not feel great, but it's not life-threatening. And so whenever I'm feeling slightly nervous about doing something or don't want to step out of my comfort zone, I always think of Marie Colvin, because she was not afraid to put her life on the line, literally, to go and report on these awful things that are happening in the world. So if she can do that, I can put my big girl pants on and do something that I find slightly scary or challenging or difficult, or put myself in the position where I might be rejected or I might not succeed.
And what about skills that you had to learn?
I think the thing that's been the hardest for me was two things, actually, and they're kind of connected: marketing and networking. So I am not a natural networker. I don't like making small talk with people. If I can find a connection with someone and we talk about something really random and bizarre, I'm there for it. But just getting to know a room full of people, I find that really challenging. But for the work that I do, that's really important. Particularly with my coaching business, in order to make new connections, to build my business, I need to be able to do that. And so for me, I've had to really work very hard at enjoying networking, because again, there's no point doing something if you don't like being there, So I've had to find a way to enjoy it. And there was a real turning point for me, actually. Was I went on a course. I was in an organisation and they did these big conferences, and there was these kind of different workshops you could go to, and this was like networking 101, how to do networking. And I thought, I'm not very good at networking, I'm going to go to this session. And I went along and I learnt nothing new. Everything they shared was stuff that I already knew. And it hit me. It's not that I'm not very good at networking, I just feel really uncomfortable doing it. I knew all the things I needed to do.
You had all the knowledge.
I had all the knowledge. It just didn't feel good. And I was good at it, I think partly I was thinking that every time I networked with somebody, I was going to make some amazing connection that was going to transform my career. So maybe my expectations are wrong. Yeah, but I realised, you know what, actually, I am good at networking. And at that point, I just let go of that label, I'm not very good at networking, and just started doing it. And now I love networking. I love meeting new people. I've really honed my skills, so I've learned to recognise when are the people that I'm in a room that I'm talking to that I might have a connection with, that we might be able to do something together further down the line, and who are the people I'm talking to that actually we just don't gel.
Yeah.
And not being afraid to just politely move on from those conversations and say, it's really lovely to meet you, I'm going to go and get a cup of coffee now, move on. And then if I do meet people that I feel there might be something there, not being afraid to say, hey, do you want to get a coffee sometime? Let's have a chat. And I've made some really great business friends through doing that, and I have, you know, so many people now in my network that I can turn to for support because I've really embraced it. But for me, that was the turning point, to stop telling myself I'm not very good at this, and to say, actually, I just find this uncomfortable and I need to find a way to enjoy it. And it's exactly the same with marketing. I found marketing my business when I first started out really challenging. And I would tell myself, I'm not very good at marketing, this is really rubbish. And again, I had a light bulb moment where I asked someone for some advice about marketing, and they told me everything I already knew. It wasn't that I wasn't very good at marketing, it just made me feel really uncomfortable. And I wasn't getting a huge amount of traction from it, so I didn't think I was very good, but I was getting some traction. Yeah. So I changed the narrative from I'm not very good at marketing, and I didn't think I was a beginner either. I was like, I'm an intermediate at marketing my business. I'm kind of midway. I'm doing some things really well. I don't need those kind of basics. I'm not brilliant at it yet, but it's a work in progress. Yeah. And again, that allowed me to just relax and really get into it. And for me, a real success moment was being invited by LinkedIn to join one of their content creator programs. So whatever I've been putting out on LinkedIn resonated enough with them to think I should join something that they were doing. I was like, oh, okay, well maybe now I can say that I think I'm doing okay with marketing. Yeah. There's always room for improvement. But I need to stop telling myself that I'm not very good at things, when actually I'm that intermediate level.
Yeah, it's so often about the narrative in our own heads. It's just kind of that negative narrative that we either picked up from someone else or we built it ourselves in our heads. And I think one of the kind of greatest piece of advice in the last couple of years that I heard is actually around experimenting. And we spoke about experimenting. It really does take the pressure off when instead of attaching some super meaning to the very specific outcome that you're looking for, and instead you say, I'm just experimenting within reasons, but I'm just experimenting. I'll try something, and whatever is the outcome, it's valuable. If it's a negative outcome, I have learned something and I am one step closer to success.